What do you love? What do you care about? What do you want? Take a moment and imagine that one thing that you love the most. Now imagine being told that simply because of who you are, you can't do that thing. You can't take part in that thing. You can't pour your heart and your soul into that thing. This is my story with theology, scripture, and the church. I grew up Southern Baptist and even went to a Southern Baptist school before coming to Front Range. So I know what it's like to be told you can't have spiritual authority over men because you're a woman. You can't even teach men or boys over the age of 13 about the Bible, and countless similar sayings that make me feel simply unequal. It hurts, it's wrong, and it just doesn't make sense. Now, the Bible says a lot about women in ministry. There are stories of Miriam and Deborah and Huldah that seem to say that women are strong and can speak for God. But there are also silencing chapters, like 1 Timothy 2, that seem to say that women ought not be in ministry. Next slide. This study, the study of what women in the Bible did, what Jesus and other important figures said and did relating to women, and what the Bible says about women in general, is the study of feminist theology. Now, I know what you may be thinking. Feminism often has a negative connotation in today's modern evangelical society. Evangelical televangelist Pat Robertson even once said that feminism is a socialist, anti-family political movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians. Now, as fun as all that sounds, it's not feminist theology. Feminist theology focuses on giving a voice to women, healing women wounded by extreme conservatism, and bringing light to the darkness that is Christian patriarchy. Next slide. By which I mean the unconditional favoring of men in leadership positions in the church and elsewhere. Let me step back and give you a quick definition. Many very wise people will claim that good is that which corresponds to the nature and the image of God. Who is our God? The one who heals the broken, who says that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor is there slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one. Who is our God? The one who looks you in the metaphorical eyes and says you are enough. Indeed, you are more than enough. Feminist theology done right is bringing about good. Feminist theology done right is experiencing a fuller picture of the kingdom. So how do we experience this fuller picture of the kingdom? There are so many different ways that you can take part in this, but for the sake of time, I'll talk about only three: learning, teaching with open dialogue, and getting clarity of calling. Over the course of this year, I've gotten to spend so much time just learning. Learning is one of my favorite things to do. So getting to use Capstone as an excuse to interview some amazing people, read systematic theologies and other really fun books, and talking with mentors about how to teach and do biblical studies was just incredible. I dove deep into the ideas of complementarianism and egalitarianism, which are the two main ideas in the debate surrounding women in ministry. Both of these ideas have incredible nuance and are incredibly complex. But for the sake of simplicity, I will define, next slide, complementarianism as a belief within Christian orthodoxy that states that women are equal in image of God, in role, no, not in role, in importance and in value, but have an inability to lead in certain teaching and administrative roles in the church. Next slide. And egalitarianism as another belief within Christian orthodoxy that states that women are fully equal in everything, including vocation and roles in the church. Next slide. I got to dive deep into the ideas of complementarianism and egalitarianism, and I also got to dive deep into the stories of Miriam and Deborah and Huldah and Eve and Junia and Phoebe and loads of other amazing biblical women. Everyone knows who Eve is, right? She's the first woman that God created. Her story is a story of pure and perfect equality before the fall. She's made from Adam's side, which is a symbol of equality and companionship rather than subordination. She's called an ezer kenegdo, which is a Hebrew phrase used only in reference to Eve and Yahweh, often meaning lifesaver or helpful opposition. Eve is a strong woman who's also the only woman on earth who has ever experienced full and perfect equality with a male counterpart. Eve's story is a picture of equality that the church ought to strive after today. Deborah was a prophet and a judge. World-renowned theologian Scott McKnight claims that Deborah led Israel spiritually, musically, legally, politically, and militarily. And he even describes her as the president, the pope, and Rambo all bundled up in one female body. Deborah's story proves that women ought to have a place in this world, to be leaders in the church, and politics, and literally everywhere else that we're called. Now, there are dozens of other amazing women that we could talk about, but I've been told I have to end this speech by 20 minutes, so we can talk about this more a bit later if you like. Learning these incredible stories, diving into them on my own, and generally just learning about this topic that I care about so much has grown me tremendously. Not only do I know a lot more cool things to bring up at parties. Hey, she's laughing because she knows what's coming. Hey, you know how a woman named Jael once killed a Canaanite leader by stabbing him in the head with a tent peg and thus delivered all of Israel? How cool is that? It's also helped me grow in the virtues of grace and humility. Learning the complementarian side of convincing egalitarian arguments has really opened my eyes to see that there's a lot of valid ideas on either side, which is something that I need to hold in tension well while maintaining my egalitarian views. It's also helped me to grow more gracious, to become more gracious to those who've grown up complementarian and don't know anything different, because their ideas can be pretty convincing at first glance, and it's hard to reframe your view on something you've believed your whole life. Believe me, that's what I've done. It's also given me a better picture of my calling, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Not only did I get to learn this year, I also got to teach what I learned, and learn how to teach. I taught the junior Bible class for a day, watched Mr. Schultz teach about 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14, which is commonly known as the biggest silencing passage for women in ministry, and even got to teach my own J-term class. The J-term experience was first. At first, I had a few meetings where I asked my mentors if it was even attainable to build a J-term surrounding women in ministry. Then I spent a lot of time in Miss Funk, preparing, building lesson plans, learning how much content was attainable to teach, and which stories to tell. Then I had meetings with Mr. Spector and Miss Downs, where I basically asked, how do I teach? Miss Downs gave me some amazing practical tips on how to plan lessons, ideas on presenting content, and ultimately gave me a lot of confidence in teaching my subject matter. Mr. Spector walked me through how to tell these stories well, how to balance truth and grace in an area that, surprise, surprise, I care about more than most things. And ultimately, how to be a good Bible teacher. After 40 plus hours of studying, talking with mentors, and planning, I taught my class called, next slide, You Are More, Stories of Women in the Church, Past and Present. It was such an amazing experience to get to It was such an amazing experience to get to teach a group of girls, grades 7 through 11, the stories of Eve, Huldah, Deborah, Jael, and the Proverbs 31 woman. After the lessons, my students had an academic dialogue about the roles of women. Then Mr. Cooper came in and explained his complementarian views. Then I explained my egalitarian views. Then I told my story and why I care so much about properly understanding stories of women in the Bible. It was such an amazing experience to get to learn about one of the things that I love the most, and then get to share it with a group of students for an entire week. A few of these students are in the room right now. Next slide. A few weeks later, I got to watch Schultz teach about women in ministry. He approached it with a very deep posture of, you're allowed to decide what you believe, because there's a lot of valid evidence on either side. He really taught by asking questions, and fostered incredible dialogue on a topic that, for a lot of students, were wholly new. His open posture on this is very important for his students to learn and decide what they believe, but it also kind of surprised me, given that his wife is a pastor. I asked him how he could think about it, how he could teach this without constantly thinking about Emily. And he says he really distances himself from it when he's teaching. This impacted me greatly because I tend to struggle with distancing my theology from my feelings sometimes. Getting to watch him teach and talking with him after gave me some amazing tips on how to be a better teacher in the future, and ultimately how to teach a very divisive passage well. Most recently, I got to teach a lesson in Junior Seminar's Anthropology unit. In this unit, they learned all about what it means to be human. I got to invade their class for a day and talk about what it means to be a woman in the church. I went through the basics of complementarianism and egalitarianism, including basic definitions, specific verses cited by either side, and strengths and weaknesses. I got through less than half the content I prepared, got super stressed, and ended up talking really fast and speeding through my content, perhaps like I'm doing right now. Afterwards, I debriefed with Spectre and Profe, the two normal junior seminar teachers, and they both reassured me that I did well and gave me some tips on how to be a better teacher in the future. All of these experiences were so amazing because I got to learn more about the Bible and about the many arguments involved in the study of women in the Bible. This helped me grow in grace and humility as I constantly encountered ideas that I disagreed with and challenged myself to think about how the opposing view could be right and how to teach that well and without bias. This showed me the importance of open and honest dialogue, especially surrounding difficult topics. If you go into a dialogue or a classroom guns a-blazing and ready to prove someone wrong, the likelihood is high that you'll do just the opposite. In order to teach and present your view well, you need to speak with grace, present the other side's arguments, and hope that they see it your way, which, if you teach and dialogue well, there's a high likelihood that you will. Getting to learn and teach so much over this year has definitely helped me discern my calling. I remember talking with a mentor last year, waffling between ideas for my capstone, and he was like, "Wouldn't you do women in ministry? It's what changed your life." And I was like, "Yeah, it did change my life, and I do care about it a lot, so why not?" On the senior solo, I got time to think about the two main guiding questions for capstone. What do you love, and what do you want? Immediately in my journal, under what do I love, I wrote theology and biblical studies. After the solo, I also wrote searching for truth, which has been incredibly important in this pursuit of feminist theology this year. I got time to flip through my Bible and I stumbled across Jeremiah 4. Now, I'll save the story of Jeremiah for a different time, but at one point he cries out, "My heart beats within me. I cannot keep silent." So I thought, what makes my heart beat within me so that I cannot keep silent? Again, theology and biblical studies. Anyone that has spent a significant amount of time with me has known that I cannot keep silent about theology and biblical studies. I would add to that list now equality for women in the church. At some point between the prayer and the reading and the scaring off cows and whatever else one does when they're sitting alone in the woods for 8 hours, I wrote down what part of women in ministry do I want my capstone to be on. So it was decided I was going to do my capstone on women in ministry, and I was going to change the world somehow. I went to capstone not knowing much about how I'm going to change the world, not knowing much about God's calling for my life. I knew that God was calling me into ministry of some form, and that I had something to do with women in the church, but I was not really confident. I was definitely in a phase of, I think this is what God's calling me to do with my life, but what if I'm just horribly misguided and doing everything wrong? Everything in capstone this year, from attending a conference on women and calling hosted by the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, to teaching in various classes, has guided me towards my calling. Having basically always grown up being taught that women's calls towards ministry were just fake, I went into this a little bit skeptical still. The conference gave me a lot of peace, knowing that God doesn't call people to places where they can't do good. I also got to interview two amazing women, Emily Schultz and Emily McGowan. One is a pastor and one is a professor and Anglican priest. Their stories were so very inspiring, and they affirmed two things within me. One, that women are definitely called to careers in theology and the church. And two, that I am called to a career in theology. Teaching was another amazing experience that helped me discern my calling. Anytime that I taught or prepared for teaching or just thought about teaching made me so excited. And I still get really excited just thinking about my previous experiences. As I may have mentioned before, perhaps nothing in this world makes me happier than studying and teaching about women in the Bible. So thinking about a career as a theologian, an author, a professor, gives me an insane amount of peace that I can only describe as being straight from God. Thanks to Capstone this year, I get to daydream about teaching and writing and everything else that's involved in being a theologian. God has definitely spoken to me through Capstone this year, from guiding me to study women in ministry, to speaking through those amazing women in my interviews, to giving me such a sense of peace and love when teaching. I now know my calling, and I'm very confident in it. God is calling me into academia, to teach theology and biblical studies, and to fight for the rights of women in the church. All right, I have spouted a lot of information at you for the last 10 or 15 minutes. So why does this matter? You ought to care for so many reasons. Remember that scenario that I had you think about at the start of my speech? Let's go back to that. Now imagine that a small group of people comes around you and says, you know those people that say you can't do that thing? We're here to tell you you can, and we're going to give you the tools and information to equip you to do that thing. That's been the story of the last few years at Front Range for me. And that's the story that I want to create for other women in the church. Next slide. So no matter your age, no matter your experience, no matter anything, you can always choose to learn something new, to foster open and honest dialogue about things that you care about, and to take steps to discern your true calling. The church is on the precipice of a massive revolution. Important and influential women like Beth Moore are leaving their restrictive denominations in search of full equality, and they're taking a massive following with them, myself included. Women are learning that we're worth more than what the majority of complementarians say about us, and that we deserve to be in positions of teaching and authority just as much as our male counterparts. And most importantly, that we deserve full equality. Now, this debate has been largely ignored the last 50 or so years, in spite of the incredible women that have been fighting. But it's beginning to be important to the church as a whole again. About every 500 years, the church changes in a big way. We're at that 500-year mark, and we're going to change the church for the better. People in the church are starting to speak out about this more, and you should too. Study and decide for yourself what you believe. If you don't know, ask me. I have resources. I have a lot of resources that I would love to give you. Decide what you believe, whether complementarian or egalitarian, and speak out about it. So my challenge for you is to make a difference in the world over today, the next week, even the next few years. Join me and so many like-minded individuals in the church to bring about a new era where women are truly equal. Thank you.